Hi, I'm Larry Haun. My brother Joe and we just finished framing this house. It's a one-story, 3-bedroom, 1,600 square foot house, and it's fairly typical of the kind of house that you find clear across the country. Now, normally speaking, it would take the two of us, plus a helper, 1 week to frame it. There's some reasons for that. It's not a real difficult house to build, but more importantly, we've broken the building process down to the very basics, and we work efficiently. And yet we're always careful not to sacrifice quality for speed. But the building of this house, it's been a lot different. We've been here a whole month. That's because we've had a video crew here recording what we've been doing step by step. We've had a camera looking in over our shoulder at every detail. The result of this is a series of videos on how to frame a house. And we're real hopeful that these videos, plus a companion book that I've written, will give you the kind of information that you need so you can build your own home. So here's a preview of what you're going to see on this tape. The first thing we do in this tape is check the foundation walls for square and parallel. Then we put the sills in place. Next come the posts, the girders, and then we can set our rim joists. Mark layout, roll and nail off the joists, and finally put down the sheathing. 2 extra sections of this tape deal with joisting over longer spans and how to build a set of stairs. You know, it's a good feeling. Come on a job, looks like this. It's clean. It's going to be a safe place to work. Any contractor that leaves a job looking like this has to be proud of their work. So we can be pretty sure that this foundation for the crawl space is square and level. As carpenters, that's our responsibility to check that. Then we're going to put down our mud sill. If this gets done properly, the entire framing process is going to go a lot easier. So we'll begin by Joe and I checking this building for square. You pull out 6 foot, I'll pull out 8 foot. We're using a standard 6, 8, and 10 check to make sure the block layers left us with a 90-degree corner. Now if they didn't, we'll have to adjust the sill in or out a bit to compensate. Looks great, Joe. It's right on 10 foot. Let's check the diagonal, see if we're square clear across the building. This is your best check for the squareness of an entire building. What you're hoping for is that your diagonals are close to the same length. Right on the money. This building's square. Finally, we check the building for parallel. We want close to the same width on each end. 1/8 inch off. That's good. Some of these foundation bolts are bent. It's no problem. Take a hunk of 3/4 pipe and straighten them up. Well, it's time to scatter all of our 2x6 sill around the perimeter of the building. It's a treated sill, so it resists dry rot and it really discourages termites. And once all the sills are scattered, we can cut them to length. That's it. Looking good? So, time to cut all our sills. A good efficient carpenter doesn't always have to use a measuring tape and a square to get the work done. Let's take a look how that goes. First of all, we sight down this concrete foundation. Get our board marked for length. We mark it with a saw cut. We pull the board out a bit. The next step is important. How do we cut square without a square? Well, simple. line the saw table up with the edge of the board and make the cut. Shove this piece of sill back out of the way and take a block of the same material and position it flush with the outside of the foundation. Then we can bring up this piece of sill and cut it to length again without using a measuring tape. Safety is part of being a good carpenter. Wear gloves when you're handling this treated wood. And wear safety glasses, earplugs, and keep that saw guard down. The next thing we do is mark the bolt hole locations on all the sills. Just align the board flush with the blocks. Okay, looking good. I'll mark the first one here. And then we just tap down with our hammer directly over each bolt. That leaves a mark that we can use for drilling our holes. We use a heavy-duty drill motor and a good sharp auger bit to drill our holes. We drill at least an 1/8 inch larger than the diameter of our bolts. To help keep out the cold, we put down a fiberglass sill sealer. You can also buy one that's made out of foam. Check your plans and the local code to see what's used in your area. Now the sills go down. Joe puts washers and nuts on the bolts, and I like to tighten them down with an impact wrench. That's a lot faster than a socket or crescent wrench. Yesterday, Joe and I finished bolting down all these mud sills. And you remember that we checked our corners for square and our walls for parallel. Well, today we've been going around and making sure that our sills all the way around the building are level. And you know, it really is pretty incredible, but they're close to perfect, about an 1/8 inch variation. But sometimes that's not true. You have to adjust these sills a bit. Simply loosen the bolt. Take a couple of treated shims, pick that sill up the desired amount. And this crack here gets filled with the dry pack. It's a dry concrete mixture. Now take a look at these bolts. They're within 1 foot of the end. That's the code, not only here at the corner, but also down there at the joint. And then every 6 feet, you need another bolt. Now it's important not to take these bolts for granted. They're what keep your house where you want it to be, on the foundation. The next thing I need to do is cut out for the girders that'll go in these pockets left here in the blockwork. I first outline the cut using a scrap of the girder material, and then I plunge cut very carefully with the saw. Plunge cuts can be made safely with both hands on the saw. One hand controls the switch, the other hand momentarily lifts the guard. It always helps to have 2 people working. In this case, Joe's going around marking all the girder pockets, and then I work my way around cutting them out. Here we're building over a crawl space, so Joe's stretching a dry line tightly across the building from girder pocket to girder pocket. Then he uses a scrap of girder material on top of the pier block, and he measures the length of each post. He marks that length on the pier, and I write it down on a cutting list. If you're supporting larger joists over a full basement, you'll find more information later on in the tape and, of course, in the book. With this cutting list, I can cut the treated 4x4 to length. One of the most efficient tools we have for cutting posts is a radial arm saw, but we don't have one on this job. So we'll be showing you several other tools. Here I mark the length on each post, and then I cross it off my cutting list. Here's another place I don't have to use a square to make a square cut. Just line that front edge of the saw up with the 4x4 and make your cut. There are other saws you can use to cut this 4x material. Here's one. It's a circular saw with a chainsaw attachment. It's got a guard here in the back, but it doesn't have one in the front. So when you're using this saw, set a square on the material, grab it with both hands, and use it in a safe manner. And here's another saw we use to cut heavier stock. We call it a beam saw. And then, if you have a power outage, there's no electricity left in the world, and your electric generator won't work, grab the old handsaw and go for it. And 3 days later, you'll be through this 4x4. Well, we've got all our posts scattered, and we're ready to nail them on top of our piers. Now this one here is in good shape. The post itself is cut square, and the pier is set in good and level. Well, let me tell you, I've been on a lot of jobs where this just wasn't the case. A lot of times these piers get poured out of level, and what happens is that makes the post out of plumb. Now, to compensate for that, you may have to cut this post out of square a little bit. So when you're finished, the post will set square on that pier and give good solid support to the girder up above. Now that we've got all these posts cut, we have to toe nail them to the piers using 4/8 pennies, 2 in from each side. You could also use 3/16 instead. And we just center them on the blocks by eye. Again, these posts are treated, but check the plans and the code to see if they're required in your area. The next thing we do is scatter and nail all the girders in place. Where the girders fit into their pockets, we cut a block of treated wood to bring them up flush with the sill, and then we nail them off. Notice that here in the crawl space, these girders are 6 feet on center. Over a full basement, we support larger joists by a girder or a wall in the middle. We nail the girders securely to the post with 3 16-penny nails. Now, in some areas, the code may require a plywood gusset or even a metal connector at this joint. Now, I want to show you something that happens out on the job. These piers, they're poured and lined. But let's face it, sometimes they're not done as well. So what happens is, when this post is put in the middle of the pier, you don't have full bearing under this girder. It looks something like this. So what we do is we nail both ends, and then later on we can put in these posts and line them up like they ought to be. So it has full bearing underneath this girder. Then we can nail it down. Another thing is that when these pier posts are 3 foot or longer, you have to nail a brace on them. That's what the code wants. Well, it's obvious that this post is only about, what, 20 inches long? But this is the way the brace nails on. Now, beams aren't always perfect. Take a look at this one. It's twisted. We want it to set flat down on that girder post. Let's show you how we do that. When a girder's as twisted as this one is, I just make a cut mid-span right over a post. That way the twist is taken up by two pieces rather than one. That's the way we want it. Well, we just have a few more middle girders to place. And to do that, we have to cut off some of the ends of the girders we've run in. We wait to cut them to length until after they're all nailed down, so we don't have to use a tape measure. Also, when we nailed them down, we made sure our nails were off to one side so the blade wouldn't hit a nail. You'll note that we're cutting to fit this building. We seldom have to use a tape measure. Here at the joints, we nail each girder to the post with 2/16, and then we join the splice with 3 more. Now with the girders nailed in place, Joe's taking a moment to sight across the top and make sure everything's flush. So I guess all these joists for this building are 2x6, huh?
Right.
Except in this front end where we have 4x4s for a deck that's going to be built out here. That'll drop it down 2 inches so we won't have water problems. And then I guess we only take 2 lengths, 16-footers and then 18-footers on over. Except here in this area where we've got a little bay window. The cantilever's out 2 foot right there. It'll take 20-footers here. So I guess we can get started. And right along this side over here, we'll run on a rim joist.
Right, just use 16s over there for the rim.
16-footers here we'll use for rim joists. We'll get that nailed on, laid out, and pack joists. Let's do it. Well, moving lumber is one thing a carpenter does a lot of. Make it as easy on yourself as possible. Drop the lumber close to the building and learn to carry it on your shoulder. This is a rim joist. It nails flush with the sill. I nail it tight at one end and then toenail it every 16 inches with 16-penny nails. It's important to tie that rim joist to the sill. When you're framing up higher, you may need to work off the plate like I'm doing here. Now keep your mind on what you're doing and work carefully. The next thing is to lay out the rim every 16 inches on center to mark the joist locations. I use a crayon, we call it a keel, to make a clear mark at 16, 32, 48, and so on. The marks on the side of the line, these show where the joist will nail. Here on the garage slab, we've set up a model floor in order to illustrate a point. This rim joist is laid out just like the one we nailed on. We hooked our tape on the outside, came over 16 inches, made a mark for our first joist, then 32 inches, 48 inches, and so on down the line. Now, what this means is that when we sheet with our plywood sheeting, this first sheet is going to break half on this first joist. But that's just the way it does down there on our last joist. And it has to break like that because we're going to go on with another sheet. Now, traditionally, it's been done a little different. They'd hook their tape on the outside and they'd come over 15¼ inches, make their mark. Then they'd drive an 8-penny nail in at that point, hook their tape on it, and go 16 inches, 32 inches, 48 inches on down the line. What that means is that this first sheet of plywood will have full bearing on this outside joist. We don't do it that way. It means an extra step, and structurally, it just doesn't make any difference. With the rim nailed off, time to scatter the joists. Start on one side and lay down a joist every 16 inches. Once you get a few joists down, Then you have a safe walkway to carry the rest. Now we've got the joists scattered on one side, but they're long, so we mark them quickly with a framing square, cutting off the ends for blocks. These go between the joists. It's easier to work here in the middle of the building and cut these joists to length before we scatter all the rest of the joists on the other side. Once we get the joists cut to length on the far side, then we can scatter those that go here on this side. I push them up tight against the rim, cut off the excess by eye. Just make sure that your joists lap at least 4 inches. Okay, it's time to nail them in place. We roll them up on edge. Then we plumb them by eye on their layout marks. And then we nail through the rim right into the joists with 2 16-penny nails. And that's the code requirement. So we're rolling joists. That is, we're setting them up on edge and nailing them in place. Now, frequently, joists will have a bow in them. A crown is a bow. Common practice is to put that bow up. Then the weight of the building has a tendency to push it down straight. But in a building like we have here, we have girders every 6 feet. So crowning joists is not all that important. They're going to be straight once they're rolled. But if you do need to crown them, just sight down it and you can see the bow. As you nail, try and set up a rhythm. You can set a 16 with 1 lick or with 5, but it really doesn't matter. What matters is that you establish a pace that works for you, going easily from one nail right on to the next. Joists have to be secured not only to the rim, but also to the sill. 1 16-penny toenail on each side. Here on the other side, we're pulling our joist back so we can nail the rim on. We waited to nail this rim to show you how we do it when we're working on a second floor. Up high, it's safer to first scatter your joists and then use them as a walkway. Because we're at ground level, we can nail this one off just like the other one. Our building is 48 feet long, and we need several pieces of rim, so we just butt the pieces together. Now it's just a matter of nailing the rim to the sill, all the way around the building. Well, now I'm laying out the opposite rim. It gets laid out on 16-inch centers the same as the other side, but there is one difference. The joists here fall to the other side of the layout line. There's more on this later. Joe and I work together as a team, rolling, nailing off these joists. Joe nails out at the rim, and I'm nailing here at the center. The joists lap here over a girder. I nail the laps together, and then I put a block in between each pair, holding the block flush to one edge of the girder. It's important that these blocks are cut accurately because we don't lay out the center. We depend on the length of the blocks to keep our spacing just right. Hold on a second, Joe. I want to check our layout, seeing that we're running 4-foot-on centers. Yeah, it looks real good. Our blocks are the right length. Here in the middle, I nail in 2 16s through the joist into the block. Then lap the joists. The code calls for 2 more 16-penny nails here, plus a toenail down into the girder. Then another block. Lots of nails here. Away. Away. Nail. Here we're straightening the joist by eye before nailing them to the intermediate girders. Okay. Okay, away from you, about 1.5 feet. It got the crookedest joist in the city. Back to you now. Back to you. Nail that. All right, looking good. Way here. Nail that. Okay. Joe and I have been up on that main floor working, but now I wanted to come down on this model floor and show you a little bit more about layout and about how we nailed it all together. You'll notice that on each rim joist, we have a layout at 16 inches on center. The only difference is, here, the joist goes on this side. Over here, it's nailed to the opposite side of the layout. This allows these two joists to lap here in the center. Then, with a 13-inch block nailed in, we maintain our 16 inches on center. The block gets nailed in with 2 nails on this end and 2 nails in through that joist into the end of the block. Here at the lap, we nail this lap together with 2 16-penny nails. Then down into the girder, you get a toenail down on this side and another 16-penny toenail down through this side. And that's what happens at every girder. We get a toenail here and a toenail here, and at every cell the same. A floor nailed together like this one meets the building code requirements and gives you a good solid base on which to build your home. Now we've got all of our regular floor joists run in, 16 inches on center, but we need a few more to support the interior walls which run parallel to the joists.
Coming back 2/6.
Joe's finding the location of these walls on the plans and marking their center lines on the rim.
Going forward, 4/3.
Now the actual joist will set 2 inches to one side of the center line. This will leave room for any pipes or conduit coming into the walls from below.
I'm done.
Then Joe feeds me these doubles, and I cut them to length by eye, sighting down the block as a guide. Since we nailed the blocking flush with the edge of the girder, these doubles have 2 inches of bearing. When the double comes in from the other side, cut a notch in the block so the double can bear right on the girder, but only cut deep enough to remove the notch. We don't want to weaken that girder. That's that one. This is an access hole for the crawl space, and I have to double up the rim here to support any load from above. Here we're working on our bay window. And that's why these joists cantilever out over the edge of the building. Because of that, we stopped our rim joist and ran in 14.5-inch blocks to maintain these joists at 16 inches on center. This bay window comes out from the building line 24 inches. So we measure out 22.5 inches, make a mark here, and another one down at the last joist. Then we'll snap a chalk line and cut it and nail on our rim joist, and we'll have a full 24 inches. You're right, some of these boards are ugly, but the discoloration is only on the surface, and it doesn't affect the strength of the wood. This is Douglas fir framing lumber, number 2 or better. It's strong, and as a framing lumber, it's hard to beat. You can see that I've let this rim run long. I'll cut it later. Now the front of the bay is 4 feet wide. I found the center, and now I'm marking the edges of the bay 22.5 inches from that center line. Next, I snap a line at 45 degrees to mark the sides of the bay. I have to lay the saw over at 45 degrees to cut the joists. The rims then nail on with a 45-degree cut on each end. A bay like this really makes a simple building more appealing, and it only takes a little more effort. I know it's hard to see, but I'm working right here in the middle of a bathroom. Now there's going to be some plumbing coming up here through the floor to serve as a toilet. Because of that, we had to cut out a section of this joist. We supported that joist by a header, and we used two different kinds of hangers, a U-type here and an R-type here. Framers prefer this R-type hanger because it only takes 4 nails, whereas the U-type hanger takes 5 nails per side. But what about if we need a larger hole in these floor joists, like for a stairwell, where we have to cut not only this joist, but maybe this one and several more? Well, if that happens, then you have to double up these side joists. Not only the side joists, but also the header joists. There's more information about this in the book. The floor frame's almost finished. We just had to add some more blocks to support the heating vents. Well, the heating contractor is finishing up their ductwork, and we're almost ready to sheet this floor. Let's take a look just for a minute at the underfloor ventilation. Here it's in the blockwork, but frequently we'll cut it in the rim joist. This is easy enough to do. We just cut out a section of rim between 2 joists. Then we can nail that same piece flush with the top to support the sheeting. Then a screen vent gets nailed in the opening. Crawl spaces need vents. A full basement may not. We've got all our regular blocks cut. Now we're cutting spatials. No need to use a measuring tape. Just shove a block in the hole, make the cut. A spatial is any block that's not a normal length, like here at the end of the building. On this section of rim joist, we had to cut out for 4x4s that will be used as joists here on the porch. After these are sheeted with 2x decking, the porch will still be lower than the house deck, preventing any water from running inside. We mark for the cutouts with a piece of scrap, and we make the cuts. Well, now we're ready to run our first row of 3/4 tongue and groove plywood, sheet this building. I came off the corner here 4 feet and a half inch. That leaves room enough for our 4-foot sheet of plywood, plus a 1/2 inch for the tongue that's going to lay to the outside edge. Now it's really important to get a straight line all the way down through there for our first row. To do that, we're going to use a string. Carpenters call it a dry line. We're going to pull that all the way down through there I'll mark a couple times in the middle, and then I'll snap a chalk line. It isn't necessary to use a dry line on a short building. I'm using it here to show you how we do it if the building is longer than your chalk line. Just run out the dry line, mark the middle of the run, and then you can snap twice. This is 3/4 tongue and groove sheeting. It's strong, but your code may only call for 5/8 or even 1/2 inch. Here Joe and I are scattering an entire row out in front of us. We use construction adhesive for a couple of reasons. It bonds the plywood to the joist, and it keeps the floor from squeaking. We only run on a sheet's worth of this stuff at a time. This way it won't dry out. And on most joists, we can run a bead right down the middle. But where the sheet of plywood ends, I need to run it right on the edge. We flop a sheet over and nail it in place. We follow our building code and drive 8-penny sinkers every 4 inches along the perimeter of the building, every 12 inches in the field, and every 6 inches at the joints. Now your code may call for ring shanks or even screw nails. Plywood will expand in wet weather, so we leave an 1/8 inch gap in between those joints. We just stick in an 8-penny nail, then we're ready to nail it off. On longer runs, leaving an 1/8 inch gap between the sheets means the ends won't always break on a joist. Now when that happens, just trim a sheet or scab on a 2x to give the end full support. Oops.
19 1/4, 24 1/4.
19 1/4, 24 1/4. We've got the edge of this sheet of plywood right on the chalk line. Joe measures for the heating duct. You're right on the line?
Yes.
29 1/4?
40.
And 40.
And then I mark it out.
Got it.
And then, with careful plunge cuts, I cut out by eye between the marks.
That's pretty bloody incredible. I'm sorry I ever questioned your ability to measure. We're hand nailing on this floor for a while. Normally we nail these floors off with a nail gun, but a lot of people don't have a nail gun, so there's no reason that you can't learn to be a fast nailer. Take a bunch of 8-penny nails out of your pocket. They come out looking like that, but you grab all the nail heads that are face down, pull them out, put them up. Then they'll look like that. Now you can finger those nails out one at a time. This is the way it goes then. I'm using a drywall square to mark a half sheet, which we position and nail down at the end of the building. You always want to stagger your plywood seams from course to course. So we start every other row with a half sheet. Tongue and groove plywood needs some persuasion. Right side. And it's helpful to have 2 people. Get it, tap it. Joe uses a 2x beater block along the groove side of the plywood. The 1/8 inch gap between the sheets can be maintained by using a nail or by eye. Don't beat on that sucker too hard. Watch your endo. Okay. You got it, Joe. Looking good. Let's nail her off. We also have to cut out for plumbing pipes.
There we go. 45 1/4 center.
45 1/4.
Both of them.
Both pipes. That's the copper pipes.
Yeah. There we go.
31 and a half, 39 and 3/4.
31 and a half, 39 and 3/4.
I'm just marking the centers of the pipe, then I cut around them by eye.
Whoop, that's got it. That leaves an 1/8 inch gap.
Well, it's nice to have help when you're nailing off a floor by hand. The small hammer works, as well as this pneumatic nailer, which speeds up the process. The plywood ends that overhang the rim are marked with the chalk line. And then they're cut all at one time.
Got it?
Well, we're
Yeah.
almost done. We just have to sheet the bay area here. And again, we don't cut first, we cut later. We nail down a full sheet,
12 and 3/4.
mark for the rim, and cut it out.
Get the diagonal snapped here. Over just a bit to your right. That's got it. Go ahead and snap. And on the getter,
Just a couple more pieces of sheeting. This is a good place to use up all the scraps. Well, this cut here at the end of the building finishes the main deck. Only thing we have left to do is the porch. Well, at least it dried up enough that we can pack these cedar boards that Joe had cut at a local sawmill. Again, we lay the first board to a line so it'll be absolutely straight.
Snap, Larry. You ready?
I'm ready. All right, lay it on the line. You got to give me a little bit. Okay, I got about 1 inch here. Looks good. Let's. Okay.
Then, because we're screwing these down, we drill pilot holes through the decking. Here I'm using a drywall square as a guide to keep the holes in a good straight line. Then I screw the boards down with a 3-inch non-corrosive screw. And here at the end, Joe snaps and cuts.
Wow, it looks like we're finally going to get a break in the clouds and get a little sunshine on our backs. But in spite of all the rain, look, we got the floor all down. The deck out here we'll finish up when after the exterior siding is put on. want you now to take a look at this floor. It's a pretty typical floor. It may be a little bit different from the one that you're going to build, but let me tell you, the basics, they're the same. There isn't anything complicated about what we've been doing out here. It's just a series of simple steps that if you follow them, you can build the same kind of solid floor that we have here. Solid so that when you roll your grand piano out in the middle of this floor, it won't fall through. Anyway, we're ready now to get our lines down, put our plates down, and start framing walls. So let's do it. Well, as you can see, we've jumped way ahead in this building process. The floors are all down, got the walls built. Here we are, joisting on the second floor. But this is a one-story building. We put these joists up here just for demonstration purposes. We wanted to stop for a little bit and show you how to joist with heavier joists. In this case, 2x12s. Here we have a built-up beam, and we're putting on hangers. Now, it won't be long before we'll take all of these joists out of here and we'll get on with the building process, putting on ceiling joists, nailing in rafters. Out there on the outside edge, those joists are going to cut to length and we'll nail on a rim joist just like we did down on the first floor. Here you'll note, in this section, we left a large opening so stairs could come from that first floor up here to the second floor.
These hangers can carry a lot of weight. Place them right on the layout and drive a hanger nail in every hole. Now, whether over a basement or second floor, larger joists are frequently used because they can span a longer distance and carry a heavier load without any support. One way to cut the joists to length is to snap a line on their top edge 1.5 inches back from the building line. Then just side down square and make the cuts. Finally, the rim joist nails on, just like the other rims. 2/16 into every joist.
When your house has a second story on it, you have to build a flight of stairs. So we want to show you how to build a simple set of straight flight stairs, just like this one we have here in the small model. It's going to go right up here in this hole. It's called a stairwell. Now, to begin that process, you have to make a measurement. Hook your tape on the subfloor and measure down to the subfloor. It's 109 inches. It's really important to note that that measurement has to be from finished floor to finished floor. Now, we've got carpet throughout this building, so that measurement's going to work. But if you happen to have a real thick floor up there, and down here you had a thin floor, then you have to make some adjustments. There's a lot more about that in the book. Now, with that one measurement, 109 inches, we're able to calculate how many steps we need and how high each one of those steps or risers is going to be. Let me show you how we do that. To calculate the rise and the run of a set of stairs, we take the total rise from finished floor to finished floor. Here it's 109 inches. We divide that by 7. That's a standard riser height. That gives us 15.5. Well, you can't have a half a riser. So we divide 109 by 15 full risers, and that equals 7.26 or 7 1/4. Now, a common rule in order for a flight of stairs to be comfortable is that the rise plus the run should total between 17 and 18 inches. With our riser height at 7 1/4, a run of 10 inches, that gives us 17 1/4. That's right in the ballpark. Well, we know our rise and run, so we can set up our stair gauges on this framing square. Over here, 7 1/4 for the rise, and here, 10 inches for the run. This is the tool we use to lay out this stringer so we could cut out these notches. Now, you'll notice right here that this angle is not 90 degrees. We like to give it a 1-inch back cut right here, so this tread will be just a little bit wider. Now down here at the bottom there's something really important. We call it dropping the stringer. What that means is that we have to cut off of the bottom of these stringers the thickness of this tread. Well, the tread is 3/4 of an inch thick, so we cut off these stringers 3/4 of an inch. Now that means that all of these risers will now be the same height. One last thing, we notched our stringers like this. That allows us to put in this 2x4. We call it a kicker. Once that kicker is nailed down, it keeps these stringers from slipping forward.
I start layout from the bottom, marking the first tread and rise with a square. Then I need to mark for dropping the stringer. I make a line representing the floor and then come up the thickness of a tread, 3/4 of an inch, and mark the cut line. Only this bottom riser needs to be shortened since it rests on the floor. I continue on up, marking out rise and run with a square, and I keep track of the number of risers as I go along. Now up here at the top I mark for the last tread, making it 1 inch wider than the rest. And square off the run from that point. You'll see why I do this in a few minutes. I've got a few more marks to lay out. Down here at the bottom, I come in 1 inch from the riser line I marked before, loosen my stair gauge, pivot the square to a new mark, and tighten the gauge. Now I can mark for the back cuts on each riser. But before I move too far, I also use a scrap of 2x4 to mark the notch for my kicker. And finally, I can saw everything out. I'm careful not only to mark accurately, but to cut accurately. That way I can use this stringer as a master template. You can see that on top here, I'm overcutting the intersection of my lines just enough so that the pieces will fall out. That way I don't need to come back with a handsaw to finish up. And to be efficient, I make all cuts running in one direction first, then turn, and work my way back. You can see how the cuts meet underneath here. The next thing I do is nail fences on the edge of the stringer. That'll help me to flesh it up with the other 2x12s, and I can use it as a template. Now you want to pick out good straight stock for your stringers. Boards free of any large loose knots. After marking, I cut the other 2 stringers the same way. Next I mark where the top of the stringers fall on the header. For the stairs in this house, I mark down 1 riser, 7 1/4 inches from the bottom of the subfloor, and I draw a straight line. One way to support these stringers is by hanging them with these metal straps. Other ways to do this are shown in the book. Then I nail a block flush to the back side of the first stringer. It's just long enough to space the middle stringer dead center.
All right, hold on down in here. Oh, hold him right there.
Got it on the line?
Yeah.
All right.
Hold it.
Holding the top of the stringer even with the line, Joe nails it in place. Then positions and nails the middle stringer. Along the line?
No, it will be. Hold it right there.
I got her. 2/16 into the block and 1/8 through the strap. Now the last stringer, tight to the joist on the right. Then we measure and cut a second block to fit tightly between the two and nail it off. Down at the bottom, the kicker, cut to the width of the stairs, goes in. I flush it up tight against the wall, nail it into the floor. Center up the middle carriage and nail all the stringers down. It's time now to cut the treads and risers out of 3/4 stop. Here's one way to get a straight cut, by using a board as a cutting guide. You could, of course, use a table saw. And here's a riser being cut. I start at the bottom by nailing on the first riser with 8-penny nails. Once these stringers are nailed in, you need to check to make sure that none of them are bowed up or down. Take a look at here. This stringer's really high. So what we've done so far is nail in a riser board at the bottom to hold these stringers stable. But before nailing any other riser boards in, we want to catch this one. We want to make sure that these stringers are level all the way across. So we can nail it here on the outside edge. And Joe's going to help. Pull that center horse down so I can get this outside one nailed. I always choose straight stock, but when I was cutting this middle stringer, I could feel the tension release and it bowed. He's got it right on the money. Hold on, I want to get one more nail in that thing, Joe, to hold it down there. All right, that's got it. And now all I need to do is finish nailing off the risers. Now the treads. To prevent squeaks, you want to use construction adhesive on top of the stringers before you set the treads. That'll also strengthen the entire stair. You can either use nails or screws here. Just make sure to flush everything up first. Now there are different ways to nail on these treads. You'll notice that we cut ours flush here with the riser board. They're going to wrap carpet right up around that. But there is another way. You can let your tread hang over right here and you'll have a nosing. The last thing we need to do is nail in a 1-inch strip here at the top before we nail the last riser in place. You'll see why in a moment. Well, we're back here now on this model, and I want to show you something. You'll remember that we cut this tread right here at the top 1 inch longer than the rest of them. Well, we did that for a reason. The reason is that we wanted this last riser here at the top to angle back, just like this one angles back. Well, it was easy to do. We nailed in this strip of 1x, then the riser board. Now, look at the way it angles back. So now, every riser and every tread in this set of stairs are the same, all the way down. I've taught a lot of students, apprentice carpenters, how to build these simple set of stairs. And I think almost every one of them thought the stair building was really difficult. And then they tried it, and they found out this isn't so hard. All we have left to do to finish these stairs is nail on a few treads and risers.
Hi, I'm Larry Haun. This is the second in a series of 3 tapes which accompany a book I've written about framing an entire house. Now in tape 1, we framed the floor. In this tape, we're going to frame the walls. Here's a preview of what you're going to see. We start by laying out and snapping wall locations on the floor deck. Then we cut and position the wall plates. Cut the parts for the walls and detail the plates. Next we can nail the walls together and lift them into position, both the exterior walls and the interior. After nailing all the walls together at the laps, we finish up by plumbing each wall and aligning. Well, it's nice to have the floor down. Once the floor is down, we know we don't have to work down in the dirt and the mud anymore. And now we know that it won't be long before we have walls standing up here. To get to that stage, we have to do some layout. Now, layout's the process of taking these wall lines that we see here on the blueprint and transferring them out to the floor. We do that by means of a chalk line. Now, layout really is simple, but I know from looking at a blueprint and seeing all of these lines out here, people say, wow, that looks difficult, but it really isn't. Here's how we do it. Our plans for this house show that the outside walls are 2x6. And to mark the location of these walls on the floor deck, we use a 2x6 block, marking in 5.5 inches from the edge on each end of the building. Now, if your walls are 2x4, well, then use a block that size. And next, we run a dry line down the length of the building between those marks, and we tie it off. We mark near the center of the dry line so we can snap the line in 2 sections. Now, especially on long buildings, this helps to ensure that our line will be straight. On shorter runs, you can just use your chalk line. I got 32.3. At this point, it never hurts to recheck to make sure the exterior walls are parallel. Okay, we're within 1/8, Joe. Looks good.
We need to start with a long through wall, Larry, which is this one, and it's 17.3 outside the center.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, we're at the edge of the building. Go ahead and mark.
17.3 center of the wall, add 1 3/4 inches to the edge, mark it, put an X on the side that the plate falls on. That's it.
On our plans, the measurement for this wall is from the outside of the building to the center of a 2x4 wall. We snap the edge of the wall by measuring out 1 3/4 inches more from the center line.
Okay, Joe, that first wall is 12 foot 7 in, from the outside of the building to the center of that through wall.
So Joe measures out 12/7 to the center of the wall, adds 1 3/4 inches to the edge of the 2x4 wall plate, and then he drives an awl at that point. Now he can continue on and mark for the next wall. Now, of course, each wall line needs a pair of marks on the floor before it can be snapped, and that's what Joe's doing here on the 12/7 wall. And you can see this wall has some plumbing in it.
Joe's laying out a bathroom wall here. Most of our interior walls are 2x4. This one's got a lot of plumbing in it, so we'll make that one 2x6.
And just so we don't forget, Joe marks it right on the floor. When we lay out a building, we typically lay out the long walls first, and then the short ones, like this short bathroom wall. Now, it's important to keep your plans handy so you can refer to them often. Accuracy at this stage makes the work that follows a lot easier.
16 foot 6, 1, 2, 16 foot 3 1/4. I'm coming that way.
There's a small hallway right here, but no door and actually no wall, so we're going to mark this one out. And down here the line got run by a little bit too far, so we'll mark it out too so it doesn't get plated.
All right, Larry, I guess all we got left to do is run a end on that wall right there and we're done.
Okay.
What Joe means by running an end is marking where a wall stops, and we note that very clearly on the floor.
Well, it didn't take Joe and I long to lay out this floor. We're all done, except we still got a rake wall. Take a look at these blueprints. Here we are right here. This is a rake wall. Goes up at an angle. Follows the slope of the roof. It's the wall that sits right here on the end, all the way down through here. We'll build it and we'll raise it up like this, and it'll go up like this, following the pitch of the roof. Take a look at the blueprints again. Each stud in this wall is going to be a different length. In order for Joe and I to build this wall, we're going to lay it out on the floor full scale. Here's how it's done. I've been doing some sketching here to show you how to lay out a rake wall over here on our floor. Now this rake wall has a pitch of 4 12. Well, back on our floor, these dotted lines represent the chalk line that we snapped for our wall plates. So down here at the bottom chalk line, we come up 92 1/4. That's a stud length. Make a mark. At the bottom, on the outside of the building, we come over 12 feet. And make another mark. From that point again, up 92 1/4 inches. We make another mark. From this point, we come up in feet, whatever our pitch is in inches. 4 inches, we come up 4 feet. And we connect those 2 points. Now, doesn't matter how wide this rake wall is. We can build it to here, or we can build it to way over here. With this outline, we can build it right on the floor. And we come up here 92 1/4. And another 4 feet. Then we come over here 12 feet. From the outside. Got it? Okay. Then at that point, we come up again 92 1/4. And 4 more feet, and that X is right there.
So without using a lot of fancy math, we're able to establish our 412 pitch. We snap a line right through our X's. First one side, then the other. And this leaves us a full-scale outline of the rake wall right on the floor.
Well, Joe and I have all these wall lines snapped out on the floor. So we're ready to start plating. Plates are the tops and the bottoms of walls. The important thing to remember is that these plates need to be put down in a certain order. If we put them down in the right order, then framing walls is going to be a lot easier. So let's take a look how we do that. Actually, it's quite easy. Here we have a model of our floor. And what we've done is we've taken these outside walls, these long outside walls, and we've run them all the way through, from outside to outside. We call these walls through walls. Here, at the width of the building now, these walls butt into the through walls. So we call these walls butt walls. We have them here, 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 and here. If you plate like we have it here, you're going to find that wall framing is a whole lot easier. Here on this model, I want to show you an example of how not to plate. You'll notice that none of these plates run all the way through. They run through on one end, But here, on this end, it butts into its neighbor. And that's true of this one, and this one. Now, if you plate like this, we call this style log cabin style, you'll find that when you raise walls, you'll always have one in the way. But look, let me show you something simple. Make a little change. See what happens? You now have these two walls that run all the way through. And these walls butt to them. So, we'll build our walls like this. We raise these two through walls, and then we can raise these two butt walls. No problems.
It's time to pack lumber. We're scattering all our 2x6 plates for the exterior walls. At this stage, we haven't cut any of them to length. Now, with all the plates scattered, we can start positioning and cutting them. This is a butt wall, so Joe flushes his end to the chalk line, and he tacks it right on the line with an 8-penny nail. We don't want these plates to move around. At my end, I saw to the chalk line. I don't need a square or a measuring tape here to cut accurately. Here's the top plate. It's got the same length as the bottom plate, and it tacks right on top of it. This is another butt wall.
Got it, Joe?
Yes, sir.
Again, tacked right on the line. I use a 2x6 block as a guide to cut it back 5.5 inches from the through wall. We just keep working our way around the building, positioning,
Okay.
tacking, cutting. But take time to cut these plates accurately. It'll save you a lot of headaches later on.
Okay.
You can see that this wall has some plumbing pipes in it. Here we can cut the plate so it butts the pipe. Out here in the center, we'll notch our plate to fit around these pipes. In colder parts of the country now, the code may require you to fill these holes with insulation. And here, this top plate can't be tacked on top of the bottom plate because the pipes are in the way. So we just tack it on the side. Now it's ready for layout. Here at the end of the building, another way of tacking a top plate in place. We can set it on edge and toenail it to the bottom plate. Here on the other side of the house, we tack two pieces of plate at each end. Where they lap in the middle, we can cut it by eye. We're done tacking the exterior plates. Now it's time to pack and position the 2x4 interior plates. Interior plating should go pretty smoothly. Just make sure to snug the plates tight to the exterior walls. And again, we have to cut around any pipes, and then we tack the plates down on the X side of the line. Tacking the wall plates down is important because we keep butting the wall plates into each other.
I want it nailed down sometime when you get them out.
Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and finish. Okay, cut that.
Here are the plates for that end wall. We cut them both right on the line. That's what we do. We just keep working our way around. plating the long walls first, generally, and then filling in the short wall. It's important to tack the top plate directly over the bottom plate. You probably noticed that I've been doing all the cutting and Joe does most of the nailing. We work together. It's just more efficient that way. Well, Joe and I are moving right along. This place is finally beginning to look like a house. All the plating is done, and you can see over here the outline of a bedroom. Here's a bathroom, and back over here in this corner another bedroom, and I'm standing right in the middle of a hall. We've done what we wanted to do. We took the wall outlines from the blueprints and we transferred them down here to the floor. One other thing I want you to notice as you look at these rooms, you'll see over here there's not a doorway and there's not a window in the place. We paid absolutely no attention to any door or window. Well, let's take a look at these blueprints. Here's a small closet with a doorway. What it looks like is that the wall comes over here and stops, then the doorway, then the wall starts up again. Well, here's the closet right down here. Both those plates run all the way through. There's no visible sign of any door. Back to the blueprints. Here's another one, right here. It goes into this bedroom. But take a look again. Those plates run all the way through. So that's what Joe and I have done. We've run our top and bottom plate across all of those doorways. Later on, we'll come back and we'll cut out sections of that bottom plate and leave room for these doors. Before we do any more work, let's review a few of the things that Joe and I have been doing. Here, this wall here, it's got pipes coming up through it. We couldn't set this plate on top of it like this. We just set it right alongside. Now we can lay out across both of them. Here's another style. This wall too has pipes. So we set the top plate here on edge, and again, we can do our layout across both plates. Over here, 2x6 wall. Got a lot of pipes in this wall. So what did we do? We ran this wall in 2x6. That'll leave plenty of room for all the pipes the plumber's going to put in there. Here we have a toilet. We needed a little bit more room for that toilet, so instead of a 3.5 inch wall, we ran one in 1.5 inches. That's a few of the things that we're going to do. There's lots more to come. Let's get on with our work. Joe and I have finished plating up there on the wooden floor. Now we're down here on this concrete slab. And there's a couple of differences. One is, when you're plating on a slab, use this treated wood. The second is, we've got bolts in this foundation. These bolts secure this plate down to the foundation. We've got some holes to drill here. So how do we do it? Well, fairly simple. We just measured over here 3.5 inches, and we snapped a line all the way through. Then, here's the important part. Take this bottom plate and set it right on the line. Now, we don't have to use a square and a tape measure to mark where this bolt hole goes. We've got a simple tool here. This is a homemade one out of a plate strap. And you'll see where it goes up against the bolt to this pin is 3.5 inches. So that's what we do. We set it right on that bolt, and then we mark it. Right there's where we're going to drill that hole. Now, if you don't like that tool, you can try this one. You can buy this one commercially. It's made the same way. This notch here goes against the bolt, and the pin marks the hole. This one's for 2x4 plate. This pin's for 2x6 plate. Now, if you don't like to bend over, you can use this tool. It's a stand-up bolt marker. Put it on the bolt. This one works for 2x4 this way. If you got 2x6, just turn it around. Put it on the bolt, straight out. Square it up with the material. Mark your bolt. Well, Joe and I have all our plating done up there on the main floor. You know, we're almost ready to start framing. But before we do that, we built a couple of model walls down here, and we want to show you in detail what it is we're going to build. Over here, we have a 2x4 wall. And over here, a 2x6 wall. They're both exterior walls, and they're both framed exactly the same. These really are typical walls. Once you learn how to build these two walls, you can frame most anything you want to frame. So let's take a look at them in detail. Up here we have a double top plate. These plates help hold the entire structure together. Underneath these plates, we nail both studs and these top cripples. These cripples take the weight from above and they transfer it down to this header. This header acts as a bridge over the window opening. It, in turn, is supported by a trimmer on each side. These trimmers come down and set on a rough sill. The rough sill leaves an opening for the window. The rough sill is kept to the proper height by the bottom cripples. The bottom cripples go on down to the bottom plate. The bottom plate itself sits right here on the foundation, and that foundation supports the entire weight of the building. But one last thing now about this window frame. This whole structure is held together by these two king studs that are nailed one on each side. They run from the top plate clear down to the bottom plate. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice looking at these headers is that they run throughout the building at exactly the same height. Well, carpenters maintain that height by use of a story pole. Let's take a look over here. The standard height for us where we frame is 6 foot 10 inches, right there. And once we know the size of the header, here we're using a 4x6, what's left over on this story pole is the length of our top cripple. Here we have a 3/0 window opening. That's carpenter talk for 36 inches. On this story pole, we've laid out for the rough sill. Well, what's left over on that story pole is then the length of the bottom cripple. That's simple enough. Now let's take a look over here. What if we use a 4x12 for a header? Take a look. We don't even have to use any top cripples. Well, what about if we have a smaller header and a taller window opening? That's where the story pole comes in again. We have a 4x4 header right here. What's left over on this story pole shows us the length of this top cripple. Now down here, we have a 4/0 window. That's 48 inches. Again, what's left over on this story pole is the length of this bottom cripple. Now, one more thing about window trimmers. You remember over here, we used a floating trimmer. It goes from the header clear down to the rough sill. That's the kind of trimmer that we use when we're nailing in wooden window frames. But here's another style. On this window, we used a continuous trimmer that runs from the header all the way down to the bottom plate. We normally use this kind of trimmer when we're nailing in metal window frames. There's more about that in the book. Now, let's take a look at these headers. It's pretty obvious that this header is one piece of wood, but that's not the only way to deal with headers. Over here, we took two pieces of 2x6, and in between those two, we sandwiched a 1/2-inch piece of plywood and we spiked it all together. So what about a 2x6 wall? What do we do then? Well, here's an easy solution. On this window, we just laid this 4x6 flat, and it works fine. Over here, we had a much larger opening. So we set our 4x6 up on edge, nailed on a 2-inch piece of furring that'll allow us to nail on our drywall, and that works fine. So now let's take a look at corners and channels. Well, here at the corner is one place we tie this building together. Here and up on top. And I know it's hard to see what's going on there, so let me hop down on this garage slab and look at a model. Here we have a 3-stud corner, very typical. The exterior partition comes into it, this nails into the corner, and it leaves backing for drywall, both sides. Now, if both walls are 2x6, we do it a little differently. Again, a 3-stud corner with a 2x4 flat in here. Then the exterior wall comes up against that and nails together. There is a third solution to this called a 2-stud corner. You can nail a stud like this and a stud like this. That'll give backing to a wall coming into it and still leave backing for the drywall. The difference between this one and this one is that this one's stronger. The first one takes only 2 studs. At the top, we tie these walls together with a lap. We cut back the double plate on one and lap it over on the other. They go together like that and nail together with 2 16-penny nails. Now here's another place that we have to nail our walls together. But this is a little bit different situation. This is an interior partition that nails into an exterior wall. Let's take a look at our model. Our exterior wall has 3 studs like this. They form what we call a channel. To that is nailed the interior partition. And then on both sides, we have backing for our drywall. At the top, where the plates come together, we left a gap in the exterior wall, and on the interior partition, we left it lap over. These two go together like this, and then you nail down through the top with 16-penny nails. Well, before Joe and I can put the walls together, we need some parts. The most efficient thing to do is cut all the parts at one time. Here I've got the chop saw set up. I'm cutting bottom cripples. We can also cut top cripples, sails, and headers at this stage, and stack them right up here on the deck near the saw. When you're cutting thick headers, it's handy to have a circular saw this big, but you could also use a radial arm saw or make 2 cuts with a smaller saw. Here I'm cutting the rough sails, and as you can see, I've got the window dimension marked right on the sill. That makes it easy to look at the plans and find where each header goes. And for now, I just tack each sill to its header. Didn't take Joe and I long to cut our cripples, and over here we have our headers. We knew how many we needed because we made ourselves up a cutting list. Most of the information on this list, it came straight off these blueprints. For example, here we have a 6040 window that takes a 4x6 header. We took that and we listed it right up here, 6040. We counted and we found we needed 8 of those headers. We counted all the windows and doors that we needed on these blueprints and we listed them right on our cutting list. Now, the length of these headers, well, that varies, but there's a lot more about this in the book. Over here, we have the length of our trimmers and our top and bottom cripples. That comes straight off the story pole. Down here, we've totaled up the number of top and bottom cripples that we need. We got that by cutting 1 cripple for every foot of header. It's as simple as that. The next thing we do is scatter all our headers. Scattering headers on the plates means that we match the size written on the plans with the size written on the headers and place each one in its approximate location on the plates.
Well, that's the last of the headers. Now we're going to start a new process, an important one. It's called detailing the plates. Now what that means is that we have a lot of marks to put on these two plates, marking the location of headers and all the studs. We have to do that before we can begin framing. First of all, we're going to start with this header, put it in place, and then we're going to mark where it goes. We call that spotting headers. Take a look here. I'm right in the middle of this bedroom, right here. And we have a 6040 header, and we note that it centers in this room. Let's show you how that's done. Take our header, shove it into the corner. Then, with the tape, we measure out of the other corner to the header. And we have 49 inches. Half of that is 24 and a half. So we come off the wall, 24 and a half inches, and we make a mark. Pick up our header, set it right on that mark, mark it like this. Then we come down, put a mark there and a mark there. King stud goes there, king stud there. This is open. Marking this end is just a little bit different because it's plated differently. We'll put our mark like that, and then all the way down those two plates. Our X goes here for our king stud, and a line goes out here to show the opening. That's it. Well, that header's spotted right in the center of the wall, but not all headers center. Let's take a look here on the blueprints. Here's another window header right in this bedroom. Now the plans show us that we spot this header 3'6" from the center of this wall to the center of this window. We'll use a measuring tape and spot that window accurately. Now let's take a look down here at a door header. Here's one in the bathroom. There's no measurement along here telling us where to spot that header. But you see this little stub wall? That means that this header spots one stud out of the corner. We do that by eyeball. Just like that.
Well, you can use the eyeball method on some headers, but others you have to measure. Like this one, Joe is centering for a closet.
I'm going to center this thing just by looking.
Now this is another closet, but it's one stud out from each corner, and Joe just eyeballs the location. Here we are in the garage, and the garage door is big. The code requires a big header. The layout for it, it's the same as for any other header. A line indicating the edge of the header, and then an X on each side for the king studs. Okay. Now this garage header is an exception. There are no top cripples above, and in fact, since we need enough headroom for cars, we eliminate the top plate, and we note this on the header. With the headers detailed on the plates, well, the next thing is to mark wall intersections. This is where the channel studs will be. I'm using a homemade tee. It's made out of 2x4s for this. You can see that I've marked on each side of the plate and across the top and edges. Here's a lightweight corner marker. It's aluminum, but it serves the same purpose. We can also use the same device to lay out our 2x6 wall. Here we are at an exterior corner. And this is an inside corner. The main thing to remember here is to make sure to mark all around. And then indicate where the partition wall will be. When you've got the plates lying flat because of plumbing, just mark one plate, extend all the lines, and then transfer the lines to the other plate. Here we've got a top plate sitting up on edge, and we just have to mark the lines all the way around. Getting the layout right at this stage will make for square and plumb walls later. We've got all the corners and channels marked, and now Joe's laying out where extra studs and blocks are needed. In the bathrooms, we need to lay out extra studs that'll go on either side of the medicine cabinet. And we also need flat studs that'll act as backing for the bathtubs. Joe just marks these clearly on the plates. In the same area, we need to place a stud on each side of the water pipes for the tub. This will leave room for the plumber. The book has a lot more about this.
Well, all our detailing is finished, except we still have to mark stud location on all these plates. When I was learning to be a carpenter back in the late 40s, I was taught to hook my tape on the outside. Mark 16 inches on center, 32, 48, and so on, down the line, never changing layout at all. But since then, I've learned to change and do things just a little bit more efficiently. First of all, we use this layout stick. It allows you, without a measuring tape, to lay out your studs at 16 inches on center, 32, and 48. Or, if you want to use this middle leg, then you can lay out your studs at 24 inches on center. Instead of starting our layout like we used to here at the corner, we started right here. And that's because at that point we have a corner that's going to set in there, so we already have a stud there. So that's where we begin our layout. We mark our first layout and our second, and that takes care of this section of the wall. The studs are 16 inches on center, it complies with the code, and is structurally sound. So now we have a header. We know that at the end of the header, we have a king stud. So that allows us to begin our layout right alongside this king stud. We can lay out our top and bottom cripples, 16 inches on center, just like the rest of the building. Here we are at the end of the header again, another king stud. So we can change layout again. Beginning right there, we take off 16 inches on center. Now, here's something that's interesting. If we continue our layout from this point, 16 inches on center, then between these two walls, these walls right here, we get two studs in this short little section of wall. But we really don't need that many. Let me show you what's going to happen. At this point, we have a channel. So we already have a stud right here. That allows us to begin our stud layout all over and put one stud right here. And that's all we need. So now, what does it mean to change our layout constantly up and down these walls? Well, it means that we're going to save a lot of studs and time. We comply with the building code. There's no change in the building structurally, and there's plenty of wood down through here to nail on our drywall and our siding.
Here, Joe's laying out a section of exterior wall that has no doors or windows in it, no headers to mark, so the work goes real quickly. But here, there's a header in the way where a window's going to be, so the layout slows down a little. He has to mark the location of both the top and bottom cripples. Joe first extends his line down on the header, then marks the plates by eye. The inside walls get marked the same way. Here, he's using the long prongs so he can mark across the two flat plates at once. Well, now that the plates are all detailed and we know where the parts will go, we can start scattering the cripples. We know how many we need, one at each end of the header and one for each layout in between. And you can see we took time to mark the lengths of the cripples on the headers so we know where they go. On this wall we have 6 1/4 inch top cripples and 30 1/2 inch bottom cripples. With the cripples in place, we can scatter our king studs, not haphazardly, but one at each end of every window header. We start framing a wall by separating the sill from its header, dragging it back into its position, and then bringing the header back into its position. The next thing is to toenail the cripples to the header, following the layout lines. We hammer in 2 8-penny nails from one side, and after they're all in position, we go back and toenail from the other side. That's the code. Then we flop the header unit on its side and position and nail off the bottom cripples. 2 16 pennies through the sill into each cripple. That'll do it. And right there, you can see our layout lines. Next, the king studs get nailed on both sides, and this holds the whole window frame together. Make sure to flush the king stud with the end of the bottom cripple. Nail a couple of 16s into the end of the rough sill, and at the top, flush it up. 3 or 4 16s through the king stud into the header. That'll hold it just fine. The nice thing about building this way is that if all the pieces have been cut to the proper length, then the rough opening should be just right. Here's another look at how I do it. First, I separate the sill from the header and position them both. I know roughly where these go because the king studs are on either side, and I can spot where the top end is. Next, I position the bottom cripples. Then I nail them off. And then I do the same thing at the top. Finally, I nail everything together with the king studs. Again, make sure all those ends are flush. And that's all there is to it. We work our way around the building nailing all these units together. And what is important is that you complete each step before starting another. With all the window frames nailed together, we can start building walls. We scatter all our studs, and with these in place, we pull loose the top plate, walk it back, and begin nailing. Here we're nailing to one of the window frames, following our layout on the plate. Joe and I find it more efficient to start at one end and just keep working down the line, bringing up pieces of top plate as we need to. And you'll notice this wall is raised up off the floor a bit. That's because it's sitting on other walls. Now it's true, we're pretty fast at hand driving these 16-penny sinkers. But if you have a nail gun, you might want to use it. This is a channel unit. Another wall will intersect at this point. It's nailed together with 16-penny nails along the side and through the plates. Once the top plate is nailed on, we nail off the bottom. Now the double plate goes on. Joe holds this end 5½ inches back for the lap. And I cut the other end just to one side of an interior wall channel. Now the idea is to nail off the double plate along the entire length of the wall, leaving gaps only where the double plate of intersecting walls will lap over. You can see that pretty clearly here. Long, heavy walls are usually broken into sections. Joe's just nailing up to a place where we're going to break this wall. The double plate has to lap at least 4 feet at any break in the top plate. On the other side of the break now, Joe starts the nails. We'll finish them off after the walls are raised. Walls need to be braced. The code requires a brace in each corner and one every 25 feet. You could use plywood sheeting. Here we're using 1x6. We just position it diagonally across at least 4 studs, letting the ends run long. This 1x6 is flush with the wall face. No marks needed. Just cut along each side of the brace with your saw set to the right depth and work your way down. Then, with the 1x6 out of the way, just lay your saw over on its side and remove the waste carefully with a plunge cut. Well, here's how the brace fits. I put it in position, then nail off the bottom end and the first stud with 8-penny nails. And then just start nails over the remaining studs and the top plates. They'll get nailed off after the walls are plumbed. And finally, I mark the trimmers to length and cut them accurately. These trimmers get tacked in place with a 16-penny nail. They'll be adjusted later on when we get the windows set. Well, we're about ready to raise walls. Now, to keep the wall from sliding off the edge, I'm nailing these pieces of 2x scrap to the rim. On this section of wall, we separate the double plate from the top plate a little bit. Then we raise it. Remember, be careful here. Lift with your legs, not with your back. You can see we already had the first section of wall up. Now, having separated the double plate from the top, these walls go together easily. The next thing I do is nail the 2 sections together at the lap.
Okay.
Well, sometimes you need to move the wall for endo, one way or the other. Just stick your hammer claw into the plate and lever it into position. When it's right, we nail the bottom plate to the floor with 1/16 in every stud space. The code doesn't require exterior wall sheeting on this house. When it does, we find it easier to sheet after the walls are raised. There's a lot more on this in the book. Finally, we run temporary braces both inside and out.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Up we go. Yeah. Looking good.
Temporary bracing on every wall is important. Nail enough braces on them so they won't fall over on you.
All right, Joe, let's move it.
You need more?
Yeah, I think we're close. Hold on, let me check. No, it's a hair too much. Back off, Scoosh.
Guys, I'll work for you.
Give me a little bit. It's a, whoop. Okay.
We always need to keep our plates right on that inside chalk line. Sometimes you need a toenail to move it over.
Get a hold of it. Up we go. Everybody together. Yeah. That's it. Nice and easy. Actually, we didn't have much trouble with this long, heavy wall. It really helps to have some strong people. A couple other things that we did that made it easy. When we nailed this brace on, we left this through wall leaning out a bit, here 3-4 inches. That way, when we raised this butt wall, they didn't bind together. Sometimes, too, you have to cut back a 4-foot section of this double plate. We got it tacked on right here. Later on, we'll nail it up on top. It laps over this through wall, and the two tie together right there at the corner. Now, if we hadn't cut this double plate back, we'd have had a problem raising this wall. Let me show you on this model wall down here. Here's the way a double plate goes. It laps over 5.5 inches on this 2x6 wall so it can tie in. Now you'll see when I raise this wall that I don't go very far before I hit this cripple. It's all bound up. If it's a short wall, then you can rack it like this and you can get by. But this wall we just raised was a butt wall running from through wall to through wall. So we couldn't do that. That's why we had to cut out a section of this double plate and then erase easy. It's time now to nail this corner together. What we want is this top plate of the butt wall to join tightly with the top plate of this through wall. Well, that's going to be pretty easy because when we nailed in this stud, we held it back from the top plate about 1/4 inch right here. This allows these two plates to join tightly together.
Most codes require that these corners be nailed together with 3/16. As we continue framing, we have to tear off these temporary braces. We knock it loose at that lower end, and then you can use your hammer as a fulcrum. It'll pop right off of there like that. We've got most of the exterior walls up, and we're building the interior ones. We frame and brace them in the same way as the exterior walls. When you're nailing channels together, sometimes that backing stud drops down into the pocket. Just pick it up with a 16, then nail it off with 3/16 on each side. Here I'm cutting blocking for the medicine cabinet. I push the board up against the stud and I cut it by eye. And then I nail the blocks at the right height. There's more on this in the book. The inside walls need double plate just like the outside ones, and you can see I'm holding this piece to one side of the channel. I want to show you now another way to brace these walls. Here we have a metal framing brace. It forms an angle, and we have holes here in it to nail it off. We lay it down on our wall diagonally, and we make a mark on the top plates and on each stud. Then it's simply a matter of making a saw kerf along the line, the depth of the brace, snaking the brace into that kerf, nailing it permanently at the bottom and holding it temporarily here at the top with a bent nail. These metal braces are a good alternative. Way back. We build as many walls as we can at one time and then we raise them. Walls are always built and raised in a certain order. I'd like to be able to tell you what that order is, but each house is different. In general, we try to raise the long walls first, but in reality, it's one of those things you have to learn by doing.
Let's go gently with this thing now. Let's pull it, again, we pull it back away, it's just lift it. There we go.
Set it off. We got something backing off to you, okay?
Picking it up and backing it off.
Now it's just a matter of fitting them all together.
That's got her. Signed, sealed, and delivered. We gotta slide this one in a ways, huh? That's it. Up we go.
The thing to realize here is that because these plates were fitted tightly together on the floor, they'll fit tightly now that they're raised. We make sure each plate is on its chalk line, and then we nail it to the floor.
Well, let's raise it.
We can't forget to raise the garage walls.
Yeah.
Raise these walls right up on the bolts.
Okay, I'll have to lift her over. You got the wall? Yeah, I got it. Alrighty. Here we go.
Then with a short piece of 2x, it's easy to shift them into place.
Crank her down. We're here working on this slab. Now, all of the bottom plates down here of every interior wall has to be fastened to the concrete. On the outside, it wasn't any problem. We have bolts there coming up through the foundation. Here on these interior walls, we can fasten them down with this gun. It's a powder actuated tool. It has a clip, and these blank shells fire a pin. Here's a pin. It's basically just a hardened nail with a washer on it. We load that gun by pulling the barrel forward, just like that, shoving it back. Then this pin goes in the end of the barrel, and it's ready to fire. It's important to remember that this is a firearm, and it needs to be treated with respect. Matter of fact, if you're working on a construction site, you need to have a license to operate this tool. So be careful of it. Protect others. And look out for yourself too. Wear protective lenses and put these on your ears.
Well, it's finally the right time, and we've got enough room to build our rake wall. Remember, this is the end wall we snapped out on the floor. The top of it follows the slope of the roof. On a rake wall, we nail the bottom plate on first. Then we bring up another plate, identical with the bottom, and flush up one end. Now the tops of these studs run long and will be marked and cut in a moment. Right now I'm placing them flush with the layout marks on the plate.
I think we got it.
Looks good.
Once they're positioned, Joe and I transfer the chalk line we originally snapped on the floor to the studs. This line is where we'll cut them. Then with our saw set at 18.5 degrees, we cut one end of the top plate to the angle of the roof slope. We butt that in to the through wall and lay the plate right on that chalk line. We mark a square cut on the other end, then place and cut the shorter rake plate. At the ridge, we leave a gap between the plates for a beam. And since the top ends of the studs are in their correct position, I can sight down and run a layout on this plate. With the plate out of the way and the saw again set at 18.5 degrees, we can cut the studs and cripples the length. Then the plate gets nailed on. There's a lot more about rake walls in the book.
Are we ready?
Ready?
Well, let's do it then. Everybody together, up we go. That's one stage, two stage. We're doing it. We're doing it. We're doing it. Just keep going. Looking good. Looking real good.
We just have to knock the double plate up here at the corner to get these two walls to join.
Beautiful.
Walls over 9 feet tall normally need a block in the middle to help strengthen the wall. That's the code. Well, we're now nailing off where our double plates lap at the corners and channels. We want to draw these walls up tight to one another, right on layout. Sometimes that means using toenails to bring them together, and then a couple of 16s through the lap. Here it is again. This is what we do with the toenail. Here you can see that we're nailing it right on the layout marks. This is a corner, and again, we want it to be drawn tight, flush with the outside. Here in the odds and ends category, often you have to use a plate strap to tie one wall to another. In this case, the garage to the main house.
We're ready to plumb our building. Plumb means that we want to make these walls straight up and down. Now you can use a 6 or an 8-foot level to do that, but a lot of carpenters like to use this 2-foot level. We attach it to a stud at the bottom here, and at the top we put on a 1x extension. That allows us to reach this top plate. Now the most important thing about this plumb stick is to make sure that it's accurate. There's a way to do that. Take it and place it flat against the wall, like this. Put that bubble right in the center. Make a mark here at the top and one at the bottom. And turn that stud all the way over. Put it right on those marks. And check your plumb stick. This one's right on. But a lot of times it's not. A lot of times this level gets beat up, or the plumb stick itself is bent. So what you can do is loosen the level a little bit. Take a wedge, slip it in here at the top, like that, or another one maybe down at the bottom. It depends on which way the stick has to move. Put your tape back on and check it again. It may take 2 or 3 times to get this plumb stick accurate, but the important thing to know is that even though you have a bad level and a bowed stud, you can get it accurate. This away. Starting here in the corner, Joe holds the plumb stick, and I use the stud as a brace, with the top end pointed the way the wall needs to move. Every wall needs to be plumbed. Most walls need to rack one way or the other. Then, when it's good, I nail it off. On this wall, I'm using a 1x6 push stick to rack the wall. The bottom end of it is cut at an angle so it can dig into the floor. I got her. I'm going to nail her off. Once Joe tells me the wall is plumb, I can nail off the braces.
This way.
That away?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold it. Just a hair longer. Just hold it more. Okay.
Got her?
Yeah. All right, coming in.
A little or a lot?
The next thing to do is eyeball our walls for straight, moving them in or out.
Yeah, that's it.
This wall has to come in. I've nailed a 1x6 to the floor and the top plate. and I'm using a short stud as a levering device to bring the wall in. Out here in the garage, the walls have to be straightened, but there's no wood floor to nail into. So I extend a 2x out from the wall plate that I can nail my brace to. Push the wall out a little bit.
Got her.
It's also important that the header over the garage door is straight. So while Joe sights, I run 2x's to the opposite wall plate and again use a levering device. When everything is good, we let in a 2x4 brace to keep the garage corner square and the header straight. Another way to align walls is by stretching a dry line from corner to corner, and this line is held out 1.5 inches from the wall at each corner. At the middle of the run, Joe checks for straight using a 2x scrap. I push the wall in or out. When it's good, we nail the brace.
Well, we have all our walls framed. We can straighten up a little bit and look around. Still got a lot of work to do. This front wall, for example, has a lot of windows in it. We couldn't get in a permanent brace. We'll come back on it later and nail on some plywood shear. Over here in these doors, you'll note we don't have our trimmers in. We like to wait on door trimmers. When we set our door jambs, then we'll get good straight stock. Now, this is a 1-story house, but you might be building 2 stories. So what's the difference? Well, first of all, you have to have a heavier foundation. You got to pour a little more concrete. But this frame, it'll support a 2nd story. And if you know how to build this 1st floor here, well, then you can build a 2nd floor. There's very few differences between a 1st and a 2nd floor. You know, there really is no big secret to building, especially to building this house. It's a simple one. If you understand how to use tools and understand basic carpentry principles, well, then you can build this house. There's a lot of complicated carpentry in the world, and there's a lot of complicated houses, but this isn't one of them. If you learn how to build this house, then you can go on to the more difficult ones.
Hi, I'm Larry Haun. This is the 3rd in a set of 3 tapes which accompany a book I've written about framing an entire house. Now in tape 1, we built the floor. In tape 2, we framed the walls. Now here in this final tape, we'll put the roof on. Here's a preview of what you're going to see. We start by laying out for the ceiling joists, then roll and nail them off. Next, we determine our rafter lengths. Mark the rafters and cut them one by one. After setting the ridge, we can nail off the rafters. Finally, we sheet the roof and show how to join 2 gable roofs together.
One of the things that most of us want is a roof over our heads. Well, we're about ready to build a roof on this house. But before we do that, we want to show you what that roof's going to look like. Here we have a model of just a simple gable roof. The main parts of it are this common rafter here. Then we have a ridge that runs the full length of the building. Here we have some ceiling joists. These ceiling joists and the rafters run 16 inches on center. In between, we've run some blocks. Now let's take a look at this common rafter in a little more detail. We've had to make a couple of cuts on it. Here at the top we have a ridge cut. That allows this common rafter to fit right snug against that ridge. Down at the bottom now we have a seat cut. We cut this notch out so this common rafter could fit right down on that plate. Now the pitch of this roof is 4 and 12. Well, what does that mean? It means that For every 12 inches that this rafter runs in on the level, it rises 4 inches. It's as simple as that. So how did we know how long to cut this rafter? Well, one way to do that is this. You measure the span. The span of a building is from the outside to the outside. Here we have 5 feet. Once we know that, we can use a book of rafter tables. We open it to the pitch, 4 and 12, and then we go over to the common rafter column, down to 5 feet, and we see that the length of this rafter is 2 feet, 7 5/8 inches. Now, that's the distance from the center of the ridge down this common rafter to the outside of the building. Of course, it doesn't include this rafter tail. Now back up here at the ridge. This common rafter doesn't run to the center of the ridge. So we had to shorten the length of all these common rafters 3/4 of an inch. That's half the thickness of this ridge. Back on these joists, you'll notice how we clipped this joist so it wouldn't stick up above this rafter. Now these joists are really important. They get nailed into this rafter, and actually the rafter and the joist form a truss that helps hold this entire building together. Now on this end joist, you'll notice that we didn't set it on edge, rather we laid it flat. That way we have backing on the underneath side for drywall. Round on this side, we cut a notch in it right here so we could slip in this common rafter. On top of this flat joist, we nailed in these big gable studs. These gable studs close in this whole end of the building. And right here now, we have what we call a sway brace. This brace keeps this whole rafter frame from racking back and forth. Here at the edge of the building, we've blocked in between these rafters. This type of block is held flush with the outside of the building. We had to rip it down a bit so it wouldn't stick up above the surface of that rafter. Now, down at the other end of this model, we run in a different style of blocking. This blocking, we've run square with the rafter. That means you don't have to rip it down. And when you're running in siding or stucco from below, you don't have to notch your material around these rafters. Now, this isn't a complicated roof, and neither is the one that we're going to build up here on this house. We're going to begin that process by laying out and nailing in these ceiling joists.
Now I need to be really careful when I'm up here walking the plates. I wear a good soled shoe and my motions are slow and deliberate. Laying out for these ceiling joists, it's easy. Hook a long tape at one end of the building, draw it out, marking every 16 inches. You also want to indicate to which side of the layout the ceiling joist will fall. Now, our 2x6 joists can't span the entire width of the building, so they lap over the interior walls in the middle, but where there are no middle walls, Joe nails 4x6 beams which act as bridges and carry some of the joists. I want to make sure I mark this plate every 16 inches just like the other one, but the joist on this side will nail to the opposite side of the layout line, so I make sure to indicate the correct side with my keel. I also mark layout in the middle, on top of the wall plates and on top of the beams. Now, in this house, the ceiling joists don't run the entire length of the building. They're interrupted at this point because there'll be a cathedral, a high ceiling, over the living room.
Well, our ceiling joist layout is finished. It's hard to see it up there. So I built this model to show you what's going on. We're using 2x6 joists, and they run in pretty much like the joists that we ran here on this first floor. Here, these 2x6s represent our exterior walls. Our ceiling joists come off of those walls, and they land on this interior wall, and they lap right here. We ran our layout from the outside of the building on both sides, 16 inches on center. Now here on this wall, our joist will fall in front of that layout. On this wall, it falls to the back of the layout. On the center partition, we have a joist on each side of that line. They're going to lap in the middle, and they're going to look just like that.
There ain't one of them that's light, I'll tell you that right now.
Well, Joe and I have taken a vote, and we've decided we don't like moving these ceiling joists around. But if you're a carpenter, you have to move the wood, wet or dry. And we've got to carry these ceiling joists into position. Our building's about 33 feet wide, so we have 18-foot joists coming from the back side and a 16-footer from the front. And here, over the kitchen, just requires one length, since the adjoining living room has a high ceiling. Here on the top, we're starting to nail the joists in place. The first one goes down flat for drywall backing. We side each board for the crown, put the crown up, and hold the joist 1.5 inches from the edge, since there'll be a block between the rafters, and toenail them to lay out. Here I'm marking and cutting pressure blocks, which help support ceiling joists where they butt up against the beams. Joe is taking these blocks to the middle of our building. Here's how they work. A ceiling joist nails in, then a pressure block with 3 16-penny nails. You could use joist hangers here. There's a lot more about that in the book. Then another joist is toe-nailed into the beam, tied up against the block with 16s. The pressure blocks help support the joists and space them 16 inches on center.
Okay, that's it.
Now whenever there's an interior wall parallel to the way the joists are running, I nail a joist flat on top of the wall, leaving 1 inch hangover on each side for drywall backing. Still in the middle of the building, Joe is toe-nailing ceiling joists on layout with 16-penny nails. Then he returns, toe-nailing the other joist to the wall, and ties the 2 joists together at the lap with 2 16-penny nails. That's the code. Here's another way to run on backing for drywall. This is a 2x6 wall. We nail on a pair of 2x4s, letting them hang over on each side. It's often necessary to interrupt a run of ceiling joist in order to box out a hole for an attic access or for a stairwell. In this case, we have an attic access hole up through a closet. We ran headers across 2 interior walls for support. Now if your hole was larger, you'd want to double the headers and the side joists. And speaking of larger holes, this is a big one. It's over the kitchen, and we're framing a spatial light well for a large lighting fixture that will be above the countertop below. I'm nailing together beams made out of pairs of 2x6s, which fit into these joist hangers. These hang off double-up ceiling joists that Joe has already positioned.
Yeah.
Then we fill in each side of the hole with short joists. At the far left, I'm nailing against pressure blocks which are nailed to a 4x12 beam. To the far right, the end of Joe's short joist right on top of the wall plate. We finish up by nailing 2x4 backing on top of the light well. Now, Joe and I have a lot of experience walking up here, but for safety's sake, we like to use a catwalk. This is 1x6, leftover bracing stock. Once it's positioned mid-span on the joist, we run a layout on it to keep our joist straight. Then we nail it off with 8-penny nails. Now everywhere a joist crosses an interior wall, we toenail on each side. This really strengthens the entire structure. Besides that, it's the code. We're down here on the garage floor, cutting 2x8 rafter ties. I mark one end with a rafter pattern. More on this later. Extend the line, then clip it so it won't stick up above the 2x6 rafters. Now it's just a matter of setting them up on the plates. Most codes require tie on 4-foot centers. You want to be careful up here. You're working on a 2x4 wall. Pay attention to what you're doing. This garage doesn't have any ceiling joists, so the purpose of these rafter ties is to tie the exterior walls together.
I'm glad they don't sell this lumber by the pound, Joe. Goes like yay.
Now, letting the building itself be our guide, I mark and cut the rafter tie to length and clip it just like the other end. And drive a 16-penny toenail, one on each side. And by the way, just like all joists, we were careful to put the crown up on these boards. This piece of 2x8 on the end here allows us to nail on a 2x4 strong back across our rafter ties. The strong back maintains spacing and ties everything together. This house has a cedar porch out front, and in order to put ceiling joists above the porch, Joe and I have to first put up posts and beams. They are supported at Joe's end with a trimmer. My end is mitered and toenailed to the top of the post. Under these long beams, we add posts in the center for support. This high rake wall is filled with windows and doors, so we couldn't cut a brace into it. We're nailing on these shear panels to strengthen the wall before putting up our porch ceiling joists. We find it easier to sheet walls after they're raised. The ceiling joists which go across the porch are 2x4s. They get nailed off to a 2x4 ledger which is held flush to this chalk line. The chalk line is snapped flush with the top of the walls. We nail off the ledger with 16s into each stud. Now, the span on this porch isn't very great, so 2x4 joists are adequate. We pre-cut these joists to length, and you can see that again, we use a pressure block between each joist. The porch takes a little jog here, so these joists are a little shorter. Time to cut some rafters for this gable roof. We'll start out here in the garage. The first step is to measure its width or span. Then I look up the correct length in my rafter book. These garage rafters are 16 inches on center, so for this garage we need 32 boards racked up on the horses.
Okay, we want to make sure all our crowns are up. Here's one that's down, so we're going to turn it over. Take a look again. Everything looks pretty good now. This one here, Joe.
The next thing we do is to flash up the ridge end by holding a 2x4 tight against the end and moving each board up against it with our claws.
We've got all our rafters racked up here. We're ready to cut them. Need a ridge cut here and a seat cut. Now, to do this, we had to make this template. Let me show you how that's done. You can use this framing square. The pitch of this roof is 4 and 12. So we set it over here on 4 and 12 over here. And then you can make your ridge cut mark right here. Or you can use this small square. It has a pivot point right here, and this is your common rafter line. Move it till this 4 for 4 and 12 is flush with this edge of the board. And then you make your ridge cut mark right here. Now we're going to move down about a foot and make this seat cut. Set it on 4 and 12, just like before, and make that mark. Now we're going to leave about 4.5 inches height above plate. Take your square and just square off of that plumb mark for the level cut of the seat cut. This is going to cut out, just like this one, for our seat cut.
With our tape hooked on the ridge end, we mark the length of our common rafters taken from the rafter book to the stock on both sides. The line we snap is where we'll make our seat cut. Back at the other end, we're using our rafter pattern to mark all our ridge cuts. Then we just work through the stack. It doesn't take long to make the cuts. Now with the same rafter pattern, I can mark the seat cuts. I align the mark on the pattern with the line on the stock and mark the bird's mouth. With the stock on its side and a couple of cuts, this rafter's ready. The tails are cut once the roof is framed. We've marked and cut these rafters using basic tools, a template and a saw, but there are other ways to do it.
Carpenters now have available a wide variety of tools that we can use to cut rafters. A lot of these tools are much more efficient than the ones we used to use. Instead of having to cut one rafter at a time, we can rack them all together like this and make one cut all at once. Now, I put together here a few sample rafters so I can show you how some of these tools work.
This first tool is half circular saw, half chainsaw. Set at 18.5 degrees, you can make the ridge cut in one pass. It's a great tool, but be careful with it. This is not a one-handed saw. This is a skill saw with a dado head on it. It's built for one purpose, to make seat cuts in one pass. Don't use it for anything else. The newer models of this saw come with a better guard. Here's another way to make seat cuts in a rack of rafters. With a regular saw set to 18.5 degrees, I make the heel cut. Then cutting from the other side, and using a saw with a swing table, I cut the level part of the bird's mouth. Here's another way to support a whole rack of rafters. Just 2x6 cleats, which are spaced to hold up a 2x12. This stack will be for the main part of the house. Now in this stack, we need to crown all the rafters down since we're gang cutting them. Here I'm fleshing them up to a straight edge, but they don't have to be perfect with this method because we snap a line back from the end for the ridge cuts. All right, let's get the length of our common rafters.
33.5 inch.
That's the span. So here in the common rafter column, we got 17 feet 4 3/4. And then a 1/2 inch is 1/4 inch. 17.5, and we'll take off 3/4 of an inch. 17.4 1/4. This mark is to the edge of the building where our seat cut will be. But first we need to make our ridge cut. The saw is set to 18.5 degrees for our 4 12 pitch, and cut the whole stack. We'll cut the seat cut with a dado saw, like we showed you a moment ago. You don't need production tools to cut a roof, but it sure does speed up the operation. Joe and I are scattering the rafters around the building, ridge end up. Remember the model roof? We had blocking between the rafters. That's what I'm cutting here, and a chop saw helps speed up this job. Here I'm cutting notches every 32 inches on these rake rafters. They go on the very end of a gable roof. 2x4 lookouts pass through these notches and support the overhanging barge rafters. More on this later. The holes are simple to make. First, kerf the outside edges. Then plunge cut. Before Joe meets me up on top, he first leans up a straight 2x4 here on the gable end. We nail it on edge against the end near the center of the building. We'll use this stick to help plumb up the rafter frame. The next thing is to haul up a couple of pieces of long straight 2x8 ridge stock. Notice that we nail down a wide plywood walkway. Now we're hauling up the rafters. So we don't bury the ridge, we only pull each rafter part way. Now it's important to watch your step. Make sure you have solid footing. Now the roof can start taking shape. This is the rake rafter with the lookout notches cut in it. Joe toenails one end flush with the edge. Then I bring up the end of the second rake rafter, and Joe nails it off. Now we come down to the end of our first piece of ridge, and we set another pair of common rafters. Joe nails his end to a ceiling joist, and the same on the other side. Then we slip the ridge between the pairs. Up we go. Raise the ridge beam high. Now you'll notice that this rafter nails only halfway on the ridge. That leaves room for the next piece of ridge. We want to make real sure that this ridge is level before we nail in the rest of our rafters. Here we got 62 1/4. We can make sure it's level by just hooking our tape on that joist, the bottom of the joist, and measuring up under this ridge. Here we got 62 3/4. Now that means this ridge on this end is a 1/2 inch high, so we got to drop it a little bit. We're going to do that by coming down here to the low end. We'll just mark a 2x4 right there underneath that ridge and make a cut. We'll just tack this one in here temporarily, Now we can go down to the other end and drop that one. Here's another leg cut the same length as that one behind us. There's the 1/2-inch gap. We drop this ridge, it'll be level. Cut her loose, Joe. It only takes a slight adjustment to bring the ridge down to level, and then we can nail off this rafter. You'll notice it has no tail. That's because this is where the main roof joins the garage roof. We call a rafter without a tail a mule. Then I nail off the ridge posts. These will also keep the ridge from sagging, so I like to put one every 10 feet or so. Well, the ridge is now level, so we want to make it plumb. To do that, we nail in a permanent sway brace. Now, to make this ridge plumb, all we have to do is move the rafter over till it barely touches this long straight edge. Just like that. Go ahead and nail it, Joe. Now, you can see we placed this sway brace so it doesn't fall on a rafter layout. Perfect. That's it. Good. Here we go. Working efficiently means we set all of our ridge before going back and nailing off the remaining rafters. Well, all our ridge is set, the sun's out, and we're nailing off the common rafters. Joe picks up each rafter to make it easier for me to nail here at the ridge. Holding the rafter flush with the top of the ridge, I drive in 2/16. About every 10 feet, Joe drops down and nails off a rafter at the plate line to help hold the ridge straight. Later, we'll come back and finish blocking and nailing. When nailing the opposing rafters, no need to toe nail. Angle the 16s through the ridge into the rafter. We're nailing off the rafters at the plate now, and here's how it goes. First, one of the blocks with the bevel on top is positioned. It's nailed off with 2/16. Then a toenail into the plate, and 3/16 into the joist where they lap. Then 2 nails to hold the back end of the block. Here it is again. The block is placed, snug up the rafter, toenail into the plate, nail off the block, and nail the lap. And turn around then and finish off the block. That's the code, and that's the way it goes all the way down. Well, the garage rafters get the same treatment. I begin by building up a bigger catwalk in the middle so we can work safely. Then the rafters are handed up. These rafters are 16 inches on center, but many plans call for rafters to be 24 inches on center. Now, just like any other roof, we set the ridge between 2 pairs of rafters. Measure for level and adjust if necessary. Nail in mid-span rafters and fill in between. And finally, block a nail along the plate. We're ready now to close in this end with our gable studs. What we do is we measure over 7 inches right here from the center of this ridge and make a mark. That'll leave 14 inches right here between these 2 gable studs so we can put in an end vent. Then we measure the length of our first gable stud, which is 43.5 inches. That's all we need to know.
We're ready to cut our gable studs now, and it's a real good time to use up some of this scrap lumber. We're working on a 4 12 pitch, just like this. So each gable stud that runs down this pitch is going to be 5 3/8 inches shorter than the previous one. And we call that the common difference. Let me show you what that means. Gable studs cut in pairs. Our first set is 43.5 inches. Now our next set, the common difference of these gable studs, is 5 3/8 of an inch. So we mark that.
So how did I find the common difference? Well, this is explained in detail in the book.
Now we set our saw at 18.5 degrees. That's the degree of a 4 12 pitched roof.
These gable studs are nailed 16 inches on center. And when you're nailing off the top end to the rafter, be careful not to push it up. Every gable end gets closed in with gable studs. Here I'm finishing up the north end of the house.
We're back here on this model. We want to show you a few details. You remember we cut notches in our end rafter? Well, this is the reason that we did that. We nailed in these 2x4s. They're called lookouts. They come from this first inboard rafter through this notch and they hang out over the outside edge. Then we cut them to length so we can nail on this barge rafter right through those lookouts. The barge rafter on this side, it'll nail into these lookouts just like that.
I've sighted down the rake rafter, made sure it was straight, and now I nail the lookouts with 2/16 through the top into the rake rafter and 2/16 through the end of the inboard rafter.
Now before we sheet this roof, there's a few things we have to do. These 2x6 rafters here, they're overspanned. They're just not heavy enough to carry the weight of the roof. So what we're going to do, we come underneath here and we're going to put a brace. This brace is called a purlin. It goes right up underneath these rafters and nails in place. Then we're going to brace it off this wall down here.
The first thing I do is toe nail through the rafters into the top of the purlin. I know where to nail because we mark the layout on the purlin. This will keep these rafters nice and straight. One piece of purlin isn't long enough, so we add another piece, lapping 2 or 3 rafter bays and nail them together. At the gable end, Joe nails the purlin to a gable stud and further supports it with a 2x underneath. Then we support it with a notched 2x post at least every 8 feet. This spacing depends on the amount of weight the roof will support. For more information now, check your local code. Finally, Joe toe nails the bottom of the post to a load-bearing wall. And we do the same on the other side.
Let's do it together. Everybody together.
This is a good time to find lots of help. This is a glue lam beam which supports the cathedral ceiling over the living room. A glue lam is an engineered beam made up of 2x6s laminated and glued together under pressure. Then we lift one end onto a 6x6 post and into its pocket. The other end is supported by a long 4x6 post which sits over a foundation pier. Now you can see that the top of this beam sits right underneath the existing ridge board. The rafters from each side will rest on top. Back at the other end, Joe nails a 2x6 to either side of the post and beam to lock them in place. Later, he'll do the same with the other post. Now we're setting rafters over the kitchen area. You can see the rafters run long here at the top, no ridge cut. But at the bottom end there's a regular seat cut and it nails in like any common rafter. Now the reason these run long up here is because they'll lap and tie with the rafters from the other side and be cut later. Now we're cutting the rafters to go over the main part of the living room. These have to be 2-bayed because they clear span without any support in the middle. Here I'm ripping the tails to the width of a 2x6 so they match the rafter tails on the rest of the building. One by one I push the rafters up to Joe. We cut a 2-inch deep seat cut here on top so these 2-bays will plane in with the 2x6s. Down here, they block and nail like a regular rafter. The rafters have all been nailed at their lower ends only, so I can go ahead and cut these top ends off without hitting a nail. Now the idea here is not to make perfect cuts. We just want to saw these ends down below the level of the sheeting. Up on top of the glue lamb, Joe's blocking and nailing everything together. 2/16s tie the rafters where they lap, and then toenails into the blocks and beam.
Now come get him right for endo.
We're working now on positioning a pony wall for the high wall under the cathedral ceiling in the living room. It serves as a purlin for the 2x6 rafters, and it provides backing for drywall. We're done finally with a lot of that heavy work up on the roof. So we're ready now to run on our barge rafter. And here on the ends of these rafters, we've got fascia. Well, these are pieces of trim. People are going to look at those for a long time, so we want to do a real good job at that. That's why we waited until now to mark and cut these rafter tails. Once these rafter tails are cut and our fascia is nailed on, it's going to be perfectly straight. On this model, we want to give it a 14-inch overhang. That's why we made a mark at 12.5 inches, because our fascia is 1.5 inches wide. Now that we've got it marked, we're using this piece of rafter template. It has a 4 and 12 plumb cut on it, and we're marking our rafters. Once they're all marked, we'll just come back and cut them. You'll notice we cut a miter at the end of the barge rafter. This makes for a neat joint with the fascia, and we nail it together with galvanized finish nails.
You'll notice how right here we held our fascia down almost a ½ inch below this rafter tail. That way the fascia planes in with the pitch of the roof. So when we put on our sheeting, you can see how everything comes together real nicely. After snapping a line and cutting the lookouts to length, Joe and I hang the barge rafters. They're 2x8 cedar, the same size as our fascia. Make sure you're well braced before leaning out over the edge. We nail off with 16 penny galvanized, 2 at the ridge and 2 into every lookout.
Yeah.
The ends run wild and will be cut later. Next, the fascia. Fascia hides the ends of the rafters and gives a trim look to the house. Here's a mitered corner, and again we're using hot dip galvanized 16s. Eventually we'll nail off our fascia with 2 nails into each rafter. You can see here how we hold it down a ½ inch, just like on the model. On a long run of fascia, joints are mitered and nail at a rafter tail. Even if the wood shrinks, the joints still look good. Well, it's not long now till we have sheeting on this roof. And all this rain we've been having will keep on the outside, not on the inside. Now, we're out here in the garage, but all our eaves from below, they're open. So instead of running this sheeting material clear down to this outside edge, we like to cover these eaves with a starter board. Here it takes 3 pieces. That way, when people look from down below, they'll see a nice looking piece of wood. Once the starter board is on, then we can sheet the rest of the building with the sheeting material. You can sheet your overhang with plywood, but for a more trim look, use these long lengths of starter board. And if you need to butt them, do it over a rafter. On the gable ends, we run the boards in the other direction, across the lookouts, and cut them in place. Finally, we can sheet the roof. The first thing we do is snap a control line at 48¼ inches above the starter board. These are sheets of ½ inch OSB, oriented strand board, and engineered wood. Plywood is also commonly used. We nail them down with 8 penny sinkers. At the end of the building, we often have to make a cut. Just slap the panel you're cutting over its neighbor, snap a line, and make the cut with the saw set to the right depth. We also snap a control line for the first course on the main roof. We work each panel to the line, lapping the end to the middle of the rafter. If it's off a bit, nudge the rafter over and nail it in place. And as we keep sheeting, we make sure to stagger the joints by starting every other row with a half sheet. We've got enough of our roof sheeting down now, so we can tie these 2 roofs together. It's actually a very simple process. The first step is to extend this ridge here, the garage ridge, over to the main roof. When that ridge touches, then we can mark it for length right here. Then we have to get a level cut on it. That's simple. Mark it like that. That gives you the level cut. Once that ridge is cut, it's going to look like that. And then we'll have a valley, one that runs down each side.
first thing we do is nail our ridge at both ends. And then snap a line where the blind valley will be. We're using scrap 1x6 for our valley support. We eyeball an angle cut at one end, position it, and cut an angle at the top end. Now when we nail it down, you'll notice that we hold it back from the chalk line about 3/4 of an inch. That way the sheeting on top of the jack rafters will plane in with the rest of the roof. To give the bottom of the jack rafters good bearing, we double up the 1x6 supports. Here's our rafter pattern for these jack rafters. This is our level cut, and here's our plumb cut. It's going to fit just like that. We measure the length of our first rafter, here, 54 inches. We give ourselves a mark right there. We'll put a level cut on that, just like that. And a ridge cut or a plumb cut right up here at the top. Okay, this gets cut. Now we have to set this at 18.5 degrees. That's the pitch of the roof. And one by one we measure, mark, cut, and nail them in place. A couple of 16s through the ridge into each one, and 2 16-penny toenails into the supports. This is one fairly easy way to tie the two gable roofs together. We're ready now to cut this sheeting to fit into this valley. Now one way to do that is just move it over till that lower end touches the main roof. Then here at the top you can measure straight across until your tape touches the roof. We got 44 inches. We'll transfer that measurement down here to the lower edge of the board, 44 inches, and we'll snap a chalk line. Once we cut that, it's going to fit right into the valley, and we can use this cut off end for a pattern to mark the rest of our boards. Now it's just a matter of cutting and filling in the rest of the pieces. You know, it's a great feeling when the roof is finally sheeted. Our basic framing is finished, and it's not long now we'll have shinglers here. Now, Joe and I, we've been carpenters for a long time, but there was a time when we didn't know how to build. An entire project like this, framing a whole house, in a way it is pretty complicated. But it's true that complicated projects are made up of simple steps. And what we learned how to do, you can learn how to do.